And once we start screwing that down, it'll lock nicely into place. Once the motherboard's firmly screwed down into position, there's only one major component left to go in, and that's the graphics card. Now, this is what makes all the funky, flashy things happen on screen. Like the CPU, like the heatsink, like the memory, it's very hard to put it in incorrectly. The PCI Express socket on the bottom here has a connector which fits perfectly into the socket on the motherboard. All you do is line up the notch with that shaped socket, and it should just slide in like so. A little click and it's in position. Once again, we just screw it down using these back connectors here, because the worst thing is if components start sliding around, they can damage the connectors and sockets, and then you're looking at a dead PC. Now you can see that what we've got so far is starting to look a lot like a real PC. The only things that are left to go into the case are the power supply and the disk drives. But whilst you've still got a bit of room to move around there, it's a good idea to cable up the front panel connectors. That's things like the on switch, the reset switch, and the hard drive light. The reason is that they're connected using these tiny, tiny cables and ridiculously small plugs which fit over jumpers on the motherboard here. You can't even see them on the camera. Every motherboard's different, there's no standard way of doing it. You've just got to sit there with the circuit diagram and figure out which ones to push over which pins, like so. Once you've got the front panel connectors sorted out, the next thing we're going to put in is the hard drive. Now, a lot of cases have very fancy retention mechanisms for hard drives and disk drives, involve putting runners on the side of the drive so it slips in and out very easily. The case we've got is good value for money, which means it's also quite basic. So the hard drive here literally just rests on two metal runners down by the motherboard. And once the hard drive's in place on those runners there, all we need to do is just screw it into position. And that's very easy. We just line up the holes on the side of the drive with the pre-drilled holes in the case. And you'll find some screws inside the motherboard box, usually the smallest ones that are in there, which you can use just to lock the drive in place. Now, as I was saying earlier, a lot of cases do come with very nice mechanisms for easy release of hard drives. Unfortunately, this one doesn't, which means that to lock in the other side, we are going to have to take the back of the case off as well. It's a little bit fiddly, but it is worthwhile, because around the other side, we've got quite a nice space here behind the hard drives for tucking away cables and keeping them out of the way. These are the cables for the front power connectors, which we fitted earlier, and as you can see, there's a couple of cable tidies there. We can lock away the SATA cables, the power cables, everything around there, and it just keeps things neat and tidy inside the case, but also helps airflow as the fans blow cool air from the front of the case to the back. The importance of that, of course, is the same as the heatsink on the CPU. That cooler components tend to work better. That's the hard drive fastened in. The process for doing the CD drive is, of course, exactly the same. It just fits into the slightly larger 5.5 inch bay, 5.25 inch bay even, at the top there. Again, you can see there's metal runners inside the case. This is just a cheap DVD rewriter. It slots in, slides back until it fits flush with the front of the case. And once again, you'll find inside that the brackets and holes should meet up quite nicely. So the final part of the build phase is to cable everything up and connect it together. We'll start off with the DVD and hard drives, and this is the data interface cable, which runs from drive to motherboard. It's called a SATA cable, and it just plugs into the back of the drive there and into one of the spare SATA slots down here on the motherboard. Right. So, do the same thing for the hard drive. Exactly the same connector. Doesn't really matter which one of these you plug it into for now, unless you're building a RAID array or something that requires specific connectors. Any of the SATA slots will do. So once the SATA cables are all connected and tidied out of the way, the very last component to go inside the PC is the power supply. Now, a lot of older cases have the power supply mounted at the top, but this newer design putting the power supply at the bottom is designed to help protect the PC in transit. That way, if the power supply does work its way loose, it's not going to fall the entire length of the motherboard and smash every component on the way. That just slides into position, and we can lock it down with these thumb screws there. Getting 4 of them, just to hold it nice and steady. Once we've locked the power supply down nice and tightly, all that's left to do is sort out this spaghetti mess of cabling down here. The first cable we're going to put in is the large 24-pin block, and that just plugs straight into the motherboard. It's a little bit fiddly because 4 of the pins do break away so that it fits the older 20-pin standard as well. It doesn't make our life any easier. There we go. Then we've got these 6-pin Molex cables for the PCI Express boards with graphics cards. A lot of graphics cards only need 1 of these, but our Radeon HD 4890 needs 2. And one of the nice things about this power supply we're using is that it's modular. So if there are any cables that we don't need, like spare 6-pin Molexes, we can take them off and keep them out of the way. The hard drive and CD-ROM, DVD-ROM drive both use these long, thin SATA power connectors. Again, there's a little notch on one side of them so that you can't put them in upside down. They just plug into the back of the drive, like so. And the DVD hooks up in exactly the same way, like that. There we go. Right, then we're going to take one of these older 4-pin style Molex connectors, and that's going to power the case fans. So we've got one on top and one behind. They're factory fitted by the manufacturer, so they're all cabled in properly. And the very last power cable is this 8-pin one, and that plugs into an auxiliary power supply that's tucked away behind the heatsink there. So I'm just going to drop the case down so I can see to do that. There we go. And then the last set of cables are for the front-facing USB ports, the headphone socket and the microphone socket. These boxes just drop onto the motherboard again. You can see that the holes are cut in slightly different ways. They match the pin shapes in these plastic connectors on the motherboard, so you can't actually get them wrong. It's very useful. And that one goes in. So. And all that's left to do now is to put the sides back on, and you've got the PCGAMER Rig. And there you have it, the PCGAMER Rig. As you can see, we've put the sides of the case back on, fastened them at the back here with thumb screws. We've attached a monitor, keyboard and mouse. All that's left is just to turn it on. That button there. Now, on the first boot of a new PC, we need to enter the BIOS. With this particular motherboard, you do that by pressing delete at this stage of the boot process, and just give that a couple of minutes and we should be through to the blue BIOS screen. Some motherboards you need to press F1, some motherboards you need to press F2. Again, it varies from model to model. You'll just have to figure out which is right for yours. There we go. Before we do anything else, we need to install Windows, and to do that we've got to get the PC to boot from the CD-ROM. That's done by going over here to the boot tab at the top, boot device priority, and our first boot device we need to change to a Tapi CD-ROM. Now, if I just open that, I've downloaded the Windows 7 release candidate. Windows 7, of course, is released later this year, but if you get hold of this now, you can use it for 12 months, absolutely free, and it's as good as the real thing. So we come out of this by pressing F10. Yep, we want to save that. And now that should boot from the Windows CD that's in the drive there, allowing us to install Windows. So this is the setup screen for Windows 7. It's really very simple. All you do is change this one to United Kingdom or Trinidad and Tobago if that's where you happen to be based, and everything else happens automatically. There's just one big install now button, and there you go. Wander off, have a cup of tea, enjoy yourself. When you get back, Windows will be installed onto the PCGAMER Rig.